Welcome to The Owl Hoot, a podcast for the environmentally curious, with me, Caroline Norbury. On each episode, I chat with a guest who contributes in some way to protecting the planet on matters of climate change, sustainability, biodiversity and pollution. Here is a place where you can gain new knowledge and be inspired. Enjoy listening. With me today is Richard Lilley, also known as RJ. He is the co-founder and CEO of Project Seagrass, an organisation aiming to communicate the importance of seagrass alongside monitoring and conserving it. His numerous academic qualifications include a degree in natural sciences from Durham University, a science teaching qualification, a tropical marine ecology short course whilst at Stockholm University, 2 master's degrees and a PhD in sustainable supply chain management from Cardiff University. RJ has also taught science in schools and worked as a paddy dive master in Thailand. In this conversation, I am keen to discover the environmental value of seagrass ecosystems. So welcome, RJ, to the podcast.
Caroline, thank you for having me. That is quite what's the word I'm looking for? That's some introduction.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just a guy who's passionate about seagrass and the sea. But yeah, thank you very much.
I think you're more than that, RJ. And I tried not to make it for those people of a certain age, like the generation game when I was talking about your qualifications, because they are quite impressive. So tell me a bit about your background. How did you come to be doing those different types of research and courses, and then to become interested in seagrass?
Yeah, so I grew up in Birmingham, so I'm a boy from central England, and I guess my connection to the sea was more important to start with than seagrass. And my first degree was a natural science degree at Durham University, and so I was actually on a course there where I was doing a lot of work with anthropology and looking at primates and wanting to know more about monkeys and gorillas and apes. And it was actually only after I graduated, I wanted to go and get some work experience, and looking to get work experience with primates would have involved working overseas. And so I was looking at opportunities abroad, and could I go and work in the Amazon or various places. But my partner at the time, she wasn't particularly keen on moving to the Amazon rainforest, understandably, perhaps. And so we settled on me doing some work experience in a marine environment, doing environmental survey work, and that was actually in Mexico. And I just fell in love with the sea. So, fell in love with diving, with that whole marine space. But I returned to the UK in after a year, and my then partner was doing an accountancy training course, like a 3-year program in Birmingham. And I thought, well, what can I do? If I wanted to, at this point, I really had the urge to be involved with working in the marine space. But what can you do in Birmingham? But I've always loved education, communication, teaching, sharing my passion with people. So I trained to be a teacher. And so we eventually split up because we were going down different paths. But I spent 3 years in Birmingham teaching, really enjoyed that, but knew that I wanted to get back into the marine environment and marine conservation. And that's when I went to become a paddy dive master and then instructor. And that was, again, a brilliant job. Again, it's that coaching, teaching, sharing your passion with people on a daily basis. But the thing that struck me, and this was working out in Thailand, was I was working in a national marine park, and yet the marine park was being degraded before my eyes. There was illegal fishing practices, there was coral bleaching, and I just felt that it was really hard. Although I was enjoying taking people out and sharing the beauty, it's very difficult turning up to a dive site and then having to remove fishing gear, or just to see it actually visibly degrade, even over the period of months. And so I wanted to know more about it. And that's probably where the start of that list of academic qualifications really came from, is wanting to go back in and understand more about the challenges and really educate myself in that area, so that I could be better informed about how I could maybe try and make a difference in that space. And so, initially returned to Stockholm, where I was actually planning to do my master's. But whilst I was there, my mum had a health scare, and I didn't want to be in Sweden whilst my mum was in the UK. She was fine, fortunately, but at the time I didn't know that. So made a very quick change of university to come back to Swansea, which was actually quite serendipitous because it was at Swansea where I met Richard Unsworth, who is a associate professor at Swansea University still and a co-founder of Project Seagrass. And also met Ben, who's the other founder of Project Seagrass. We were teaching together at the Dive Club. And that's where Project Seagrass was born. And so my first master's was a sort of natural science master's with him. And then for the PhD, which was interdisciplinary, I needed to do further training in social science research methods. And so that was at Cardiff. But over that time period in South Wales, it allowed me to upskill both in the natural sciences and the social sciences, and also to be working alongside other people who are passionate in this space, and really sort of found Project Seagrass and get it off the ground. So yeah, that's a sort of brief history of how I've got to where we are now.
Yeah, I like the fact that you have these threads of commonality through what's, fairly different types of things you've been doing, but that whole communicating, curiosity, those are themes, aren't they? I was wondering, when you were actually out doing your diving, had you come across seagrass at that point? Was it already on your radar?
Not at all. And this is the thing that struck me when I turned up at Swansea. So I was first introduced to seagrass as an ecosystem at Stockholm University. So it was a short course, a unit, and it covered, I can remember it now, it covered 5 broad habitat types. So you looked at open ocean systems, you looked at coral reefs, you looked at seagrass meadows, you looked at mangroves, and then you looked at land systems and the interplay between those 5. And so that's the first time I'd really delved into seagrass meadows. And then leaving Stockholm with that qualification and coming to Swansea, I was actually, because I had made that late switch to Swansea, I was actually down to do plankton modelling because I was basically last in, so got last dibs, I think. I was just given a topic, and that's definitely not what I wanted to do at all. And I remember Rich Unsworth gave a lecture, and at this time he wasn't taking students, but he gave a lecture on seagrass ecosystems. And I remember making a beeline for him at the end of the lecture and being like, I will do anything on seagrass ecosystems, any research you want me to do, if I can swap to seagrass. I wanted to do mangroves, coral, or seagrass, some sort of coastal ecosystem, and not plankton. And at the time, he didn't take students, but he went away and came back and said, you could do this meta-analysis for me, this desk-based work. So bit his hand off, said, yeah, absolutely, I'll do that. And it was through reading all the papers, doing a big literature review on seagrass science, that it just dawned on me how important this habitat was, but that no one had heard of it. And as a biology teacher, a secondary school science teacher, and as a diving instructor, I thought if anyone was going to have heard of it, surely I'd have heard of this habitat. And yet I hadn't. And that kind of concerned me. And I was like, is that unique? Is that just me? Growing up in Birmingham, it could be just the fact that I grew up in the city, but no one really knew about seagrasses. They weren't being taught really in universities. They were kind of this forgotten habitat. And myself and Ben, we'd speak about this in the pub or when we were teaching diving, and it was just always that point of conversation. And so when we went to speak to Rich and said, this is an issue, is there something we could do about it? And he knew it was an issue as well, because he was producing fantastic research in this space, and a lot of his colleagues were globally and still are. It's a relatively small global community, but growing. But it just wasn't reaching the public. It wasn't reaching policy. It wasn't reaching out. And so we initially set up Project Seagrass almost as that mouthpiece or a voice for seagrass, where we could communicate some of the science that was being done, but in a way that was just accessible and fun and interesting, leaning on some of my skills, maybe as a teacher and outreach and engagement. And Ben's very, very creative. And so we put together a framework for an embryonic NGO. We actually founded it out of my student house in Swansea. Initially, that was the registered address, was Project Seagrass. And it's filled a gap. It's been one of those, we've just grown rapidly, I guess. And it's been an amazing journey. It's been tiring and it's been hard and it's not always been easy, but yeah, it's been worth it.
The best things never are they? They're always a bit of a challenge. So I'm wondering, because obviously you mentioned coral reefs before, and I would imagine pretty much everybody's heard of a coral reef and can visualize it. And as you rightly say, seagrass probably is on no one's radar except your now global space that you've heralded. Why is that? Is it not as important? Is it not as pretty? How is it not got on the people's radar?
Yeah, so I think it'd be interesting. We often discuss this in terms of where is seagrass recognised, and somewhere like Australia. So to cast back to 2011, 2010, when Richard and Leanne used to work out on the Great Barrier Reef as seagrass scientists over there, and when they returned to Wales, they were kind of shocked that within the UK consciousness or the UK regulatory framework or whatever, seagrass wasn't a thing. So why were seagrass meadows being protected and heralded for all these benefits they were bringing elsewhere in the world, but they haven't been afforded that same, not respect, but level of protection and governance and management that were over here? And part of that I can understand, because we've actually lost a lot of our seagrass meadows around the UK. And if you've never seen one, then why would you know that it used to exist? So there's that sort of loss element. But there's also just been this lack of science and lack of evidence, I guess, to show how important they are. So what you do see across the world is there is an uneven recognition, I guess, of seagrass meadows. But as more and more science is being done and it's being communicated to people why seagrass meadows are important, that they're rapidly climbing up the agenda in terms of these priority habitats we need to look after. In terms of charisma, seagrass meadows perhaps don't hold, on face value at least, that same charisma that coral reefs do. Coral reefs are very pretty. The dive industry is often built around coral reefs, or at least the way that it's marketed. Although there's fantastic diving in the Mediterranean in certain locations where that's based around seagrass habitat. But seagrass is exactly what it says on the tin. Visually it's grass underwater, and actually some of the features that make seagrass so productive, nursery habitat for baby fish, isn't conducive to them being a nice dive sites, because seagrass, all the baby fish hide in the seagrass. And if you want to go on a dive, you want to go and see things. You don't want to go and look at grass and be like, there's lots of animals in there, but I can't see them. So I guess it's that sort of the fact that they form these stands or these prairies or these meadows, which are full of life, but often that life is tiny and protected within that. And also that they're just not as colourful. You're not the reds and purples and yellows. They are green. They are plants. So yeah. But you know what? I think the perception's changing, and I think a lot of that is testament that there's some fantastic videographers and photographers out there now who are documenting these ecosystems, sharing fantastic imagery, and really helping to communicate on a level which isn't to do with like the science and the numbers. It's to do with the emotion, the charisma of these ecosystems, and that's made a huge difference in us, in the ability of people to connect on a, use the term, spiritual level, but like a reason for just enjoying the habitat for what it is, just enjoying nature for what it is, rather than being like, it stores carbon, it stores fisheries, it's worth this amount of money per year.
Yeah, and you raise a good point there. Why are we ascribing value to it? Is it because it's part of our natural world, or is it because of the things you just mentioned now about it absorbing carbon and being a place where other creatures can live? I'm guessing it's doing all of those things. Where do people connect with that?
Totally. So I often find my language that I'm using, I have to change depending on who I'm speaking to. So if you're speaking to industry or if you're speaking to government, you might use the term ecosystem services, or different governments actually using different terms around natural capital and nature-based solutions. And there's lots of buzzwords out there that tend to be used in different industries. As scientists, we tend to frame it under this ecosystem service element. So what are the services, what are the benefits that nature provides just for being there? And for seagrass meadows, one of the services which is really high on the agenda, or the benefits from nature, is they store, and this isn't true across all seagrass species, but they store a lot of carbon. They're phenomenal carbon sequestering species. And in the context of a global climatic emergency, that's really shot them up the league table in terms of interest. And also, like I referred to around fisheries and biodiversity, we're also facing a biodiversity crisis, and food security is going to be a big issue over the next 30 years. And seagrass meadows are fisheries powerhouses, and it's quite simple, really. They're nursery grounds for fish, and so if you lose nursery grounds, you're losing baby fish, and no baby fish means no adult fish. And so, if we protect these nursery grounds as critical habitat, which is super productive, then you're going to have more baby fish and they'll go on to become adult fish, and then you've got that food security. So I guess it's those dual benefits of seagrass ecosystems that, from a policy perspective, at the governmental level, are really attractive. And then I guess in terms of the more human connection, one of the things I like about seagrass, I really shouldn't say this as the CEO of Project Seagrass, but for me, it's more than just seagrass. We need to be thinking about the sustainable management of the oceans and the coastal zone more generally, and connecting people with the ocean and connecting people with just nature again. And so seagrass is a fantastic vehicle to do that, and particularly for me as a gateway into the marine space. For terrestrial restoration projects or terrestrial conservation projects, they're accessible because they're on the land. The sea can seem a little bit distant or a bit hard to engage with. And when we talk about native oyster restoration or horse mussel beds or anything which isn't a plant, the life cycle, oyster spat, and it can be a little bit more complicated and removed for people who aren't familiar. But I think everyone gets plants, and seagrasses are a plant. So they've got seeds, and then they grow from the seed. They flower, produce more seeds. You collect those seeds, you plant those seeds. And people understand we're underwater gardening is what we're doing. So people have got that instant connection where they understand the process. And seagrasses, by their very nature, are found in this coastal zone. So it's very accessible. You can get mass participation involved. We've had young people from 7 years old out snorkeling, picking seeds, all the way up to, well, I won't mention their ages, but elderly people who wanted to get involved in the space, and it's accessible for everybody. So that there's that way where you can use seagrass to say, look, we can restore our marine environment as well. And actually, the marine environment isn't just a box with water and sand. There's a rich mosaic of habitats there: mussel beds, oyster reefs, kelp forests, seagrass meadows, and really, especially with modern technology and these small cameras and everything else that we can get, we can really bring the ocean into people's lives in a way that we haven't been able to do previously.
I think that's a really good point, because people might imagine the only way they're going to see seagrass is by putting on dive gear, but it sounds like because they're in shallower waters, you can literally put just a mask on and away you go.
Absolutely. And so seagrasses are found in the UK. We've got two species. We've got dwarf eelgrass and eelgrass, and so that's Zostrinolti, or I think it's recently been classified as Nanozostrinolti, and Zostrum marina. But we've only got these two species, and they're found in that intertidal space. So the dwarf eelgrass is found up higher on the intertidal, and it's I guess more linked with widgeon, Brent geese, migratory bird life and waterfowl, and has a really important ecosystem role there. And then as you head down the intertidal zone into the subtidal, that's where you'll come across Zostrum marina, and Zostrum marina will be probably in the really clear waters of the Outer Hebrides, maybe 7, 8, 9 meters deep max, probably, I'd have thought. Maybe in Cornwall and the Scillies, you might find it around that depth as well. But it's shallow. It's really, really shallow, and they tend to be found in those shallow, sheltered coastal environments where they're able to survive. They're not found in the surf zone because there's too much energy there. And so, if you were going to go wild swimming, of which there's been a huge growth during lockdown, or stand-up paddleboarding, or there's more people getting out into this space, and so there's more and more people coming across these seagrass habitats.
I think the value of getting people out there and seeing it and connecting with it has huge potential, because I do believe that when people are connected with something, they want to then protect it. And in terms of protection, you obviously mentioned earlier that there's been huge losses. Why has that been the case? And I know that your projects are involved in trying to reverse that. So tell me a bit about why and what you're doing to mitigate that.
Yeah, okay. So globally, I'll go global and then local. So globally, we're involved in a few projects, and one, for example, is in the Indo-Pacific, where we've historically done a lot of work, and that's about building scientific capacity. There's community groups and there's organisations on the ground we're working in 5 countries: Malaysia, Thailand, East Timor, Philippines, and Indonesia. And there are organisations there wanting to conduct robust scientific surveys to evidence how important their seagrass meadows are to lever policy change. And so, that sort of collaborative community working with colleagues globally is a big part of what we do. And where seagrass meadows have been lost in those countries is all slightly different. Some of it's where seagrass meadows might be found slightly deeper, could be through active bottom touching gear, which might just drag through a seagrass meadow and damage it. It could be through water quality. So if there's pollution or runoff into the marine space and it's heavy enough density, that can have a big impact on seagrass meadows. And actually, it's that story which is the biggest one for the UK. If we look at seagrass loss around the UK, it's not through fishing gear, it's through poor water quality, and it's historical. If you look back at the UK during the Industrial Revolution, or you look back at the UK and all the big cities before we had, and we still don't have the best. We still have Victorian level infrastructure when it comes to effluent and sewage, and there's a big campaign around that at the moment. But the Thames 200 years ago, the amount of sewage, effluent, and just rubbish that was being thrown into the Thames has led to habitat loss, not just of seagrass, but lots of benthic habitats within these key estuaries. And the same story will be true in the Humber or the Clyde or the Firth of Forth. But what we have seen is an improvement of water qualities in these estuaries. Sitting here in Edinburgh, looking at the Firth of Forth, there's documented improvements to the water quality. Less raw sewage is going into the Firth of Forth. We still have that problem as the rest of the UK does, with storm overflow. But the organisations up here are working to make Edinburgh more spongy, so there's less runoff of water. There's better management practices for farmland and the surrounding area. The paper mills have shut down, the coal-fired power stations have shut down, and so the water quality year on year is improving. Now, in some locations, the removal of the pressure will be enough for habitats to bounce back. If there's a strong enough or resilient enough fragment left, then as that water quality improves, there will be a natural rebound. But in some locations, the habitats actually become locally extinct because the water quality would have been so poor that every last plant died, and then there's not a seed bank to get the seeds back into that space. And so what we're doing through some of the restoration work is identifying where seagrass might have been previously, could be returned. If the water quality is good enough, then you can return a basic population there, and then hopefully nature, if the water quality remains good enough, can take its course. And I guess to build on that, one of the flagship projects that I look at globally, a role model project for us, is a project that was being run out of Chesapeake Bay in the States. It's Bob Orth's lab. For 20 years now, they've been restoring seagrass, much like we do over here, into the Chesapeake Bay. And it's been a combination of, over that period, reducing the poor water quality entering the estuary, returning oysters as well, which helped to enhance the quality of the water. And I think they've only restored maybe 70 million seeds. I'd have to check my most recent figures from this project, but I think it's in the order of 70 million seeds. But what they've seen is the system's essentially flipped. It's gone from an unproductive system to a system which is actually beneficial for seagrass, because the more seagrass there is, the better the light coming through to the sea floor, the better the water quality, and it becomes a positive feedback loop. And so they flipped a system from a very negative state into a very positive state, and they've gone from no seagrass essentially to 3,612 hectares, so 36 kilometers square of seagrass in 20 years. And, it's that level of ambition for recovery that I'd love to see over here. We're excited because we started the journey. We've done 2 hectares, but when you compare the scale, it's, there's no contest there, is there? But we are at the start of our journey, and it's about normalizing that ambition, I think.
Well, absolutely. And those numbers are incredible. They are very impressive just by the sheer number that you're talking about there. And what a great inspiration for you to be able to do that here in the UK. I mean, 2 points there. One is it's it's always astounded me that our water quality, you think because we can drink water out of our tap and we have flushing toilets that we've got that's sorted, but we so have not. And the other point that you make about it then restoring water quality by being there, by you're restoring the seagrass is such a great win. And I guess that's where the term sort of nature-based solution would be drawn into that sort of as a selling point. In terms of those numbers, how easy is it to get to those vast numbers? Are we talking about a huge time frame or of manpower? Is it what's the ambition?
Oh, there's so many elements to that. We'd love to see that level of ambition over here, and certainly there are a number of organisations who've got that level of ambition. There's lots of legacy issues in the UK, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just the way that we've evolved as a nation or a cluster of nations, and that's with the industrial evolution coming early and infrastructure around sewage and etc. going in early, relatively speaking. The capacity wasn't built for the cities of our size, and it's very expensive to retrofit. There was lots of benefits in the early 1990s. Some pretty stringent EU laws came in, and water industry had to respond to those. But that was really to address that sort of first wave of sewage pollution. But now the second sort of wave that we're experiencing now, and Surfers Against Sewage are doing a lot of work in this space. I'm not too sure if you follow Hugo Tagholm and the team down there, but they're really shining a light on this issue. And it's kind of this issue that we've got this infrastructural issue. We need to improve wastewater management, but it's going to be a relatively expensive thing to do, but way cheaper than the issues that it's actually causing. In terms of restoration. So the thing that always strikes me with these kind of restoration or conservation projects is it's much easier for some reason to be able to get funding to do restoration rather than just prevent the loss in the first place. And prevention is always better than cure, always. So if we can reduce the pressures and the burden on the marine environment, we'll see nature recover. And so that's the first port of call. There is some pretty tough decisions. Well, they're not tough, just make them. But let's start that journey of addressing the infrastructure. And then there's elements around just the way that our economy's grown up and developed. And I was actually on a call the other day with some of the regulators in the marine space and around marine licensing. And marine licenses historically have developed around the need to sort of regulate and manage extraction from the marine space, whether that's oil rigs or whether that's fisheries or whatever it may be. Never before has there been projects which go back and go, oh, we're going to put something back, but it's for like the public good. So the law isn't geared up for restoration projects. If I think about, and this might sound crazy, but if I think about like putting a biodegradable bag with sand in it and seed on the sea floor, if that sand is new to the marine environment, it's new sediment, then by the letter of the law, I'm creating it's a construction project. So I need a marine construction license. And that, that's not the regulators' fault, because they just need to apply the letter of the law. And I completely understand that. But it does seem a little bit, it makes the whole process of trying to restore the marine environment a little bit more complicated, because there's almost all these legal hurdles which just aren't fit for purpose. And so there needs to be that wider conversation around, if we are going to fully engage with the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and if we are going to adopt nature-based solutions to address the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis more broadly, we need to tinker with our tools and our legislation to make that possible. And of course, it needs to be regulated, but we need to think. We need to actively progress legislation in this space. And there's a whole bunch of other things I could probably talk about, but I won't go into it now.
That sounds like a frustrating challenge, primarily because when you're up against policy like that, it's just so long to get through and get those things changed, isn't it?
It is, but we talk about an enabling environment, and that's where, from a governmental perspective, you can make a much more enabling environment by policy change, but policy change takes time. But within regulators and within the bodies that have to deploy the law, there are ways that we can think about how we can work together to actually make it possible to do some of this work, even within the current confines. Because, the people who are having to say this is the legal system, this is what you need to do, I think they will also recognise, I might be speaking on behalf of them here, but I think they also recognise that it's a little bit silly to think of a seagrass restoration project as a construction project. But that is what it is if I move new sand into the area. If I use sand which is already existing in the marine environment, so just take that sand out and put that sand into the Hessian bag, then it's not new sand. So it's sand that already existed. So there are ways that you can sort of work around the project. It may not be ideal, and certainly for long-term restoration, it's not a good approach. But for the time being, whilst we're having this conversation and whilst we're developing collaboratively together a route forward, and that's key, I think we all need to work together in this space. Then we can start making we can start at least to make progress. That's the key thing here, is collaboration. There's no point. I find it very difficult to engage in conversations in this space where you're at loggerheads. Blame this person. You're blaming the regulator, or you're blaming this individual. You're blaming that group or that industry. That doesn't help, because within an industry, there's a huge variety of different organizations and people at play. Within government, so let's find the common ground and try and find a solution.
I imagine that perspective, that attitude you take to obstacles and dealing with people that you've got to collaborate with if you're going to make progress is pretty essential to go forward with. And I'm guessing that kind of comes from your teaching communication type skills background.
Maybe. I think with the big global challenges, it's not going to be any one individual. There's not going to be any silver bullet here. We're all in this together. We've got one planet, and when it's not in great shape, and we need to do something about it urgently. And when I think about conflict in the conflict resolution in that way, I never see any progress with those conflicts. It's just, you can see this on Twitter, just one group bashing another group and bashing another group. And there's so much more that unites us than divides us. And so what is it where is the common ground? And let's have a conversation around actually the understanding of what you think I'm after and what I think you're after. And is actually that what we're both, is it what you're after? Because sometimes I feel with those conflicts, you can get two groups who are arguing over whatever it may be, but they're both adopting their positions, and almost like entrenched positions, based upon an idea of what the other person thinks rather than what they actually think. And there's no way you're going to actually know what they think unless you have that conversation. So it's like de-escalating the tension and being like, oh, we can work together on this. We both want more fish, or we both want, I don't know, a healthier seabed, better water quality. And yeah, and in terms of, there's been a lot of interest in Project Seagrass and what we do as an organization particularly the past 24 months. And there's organizations out there who know, like they know they need to up their game. They know that they need to be on a journey to become more sustainable, to reduce their carbon footprint, to reduce the impact they have on the environment. But they also want help. Within a lot of these organizations, there's legislation coming in saying they need to reach net zero and they need to do X, Y, and Z. And if you manufacture cans, or if you make clothes, or whatever it is that your organization does, you probably don't come from an ecological sustainability background. And therefore you're you're being asked to address things that you don't have any knowledge about. And it's like, help. And so if we took the position of like, we're not going to work with you because we don't know your environmental track record is terrible, and they're going, please work with us because we want to improve. If I just shut them off there, then we're not going to see any change because they don't know how to. And so it's about that accepting that we're all in this together and we can transition, but it's going to take us working together.
Yeah, and I think you touch on a big picture, standing back and seeing the big picture rather than, or as well as looking at what you want to accomplish within your realm, but you're also standing back and going, well, we all need to be part of this. I think that's such a healthy healthy way to look at it.
Well, I think fundamentally, and I think this is the global picture, I always find when you think about the state of the planet and you look at it and you zoom out and you give it the real global perspective, the small day-to-day, oh, I managed to do this or I managed to, it doesn't matter. It's what we achieve collectively as a society. And we work with the UN. So we're supporting partners of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And the UN, by definition, is global. And so it really helps to be in that room and have those conversations where, I might be worrying about point source pollution in the Firth of Forth, but they're thinking about the Great Green Wall across North Africa and desertification. And it just, the scale of some of the challenges is so enormous that your individual worries about individual projects might be are just kind of a little bit lost. Like, they are of course important, but they, in the big scheme of things, you need to understand that you need to feel the whole challenge. And also, I love the philosophy because it's the first time for me anyway that I can think of a UN decade which is about grassroots empowerment and like keep bringing communities on board. It's the whole model of it is not top down, it's bottom up. It's generation restoration, decade with a hashtag. It's about mobilizing people and giving people agency and giving people permission to empower them to get out and be involved in nature restoration, and whether that's in the sea or land or whatever, and to connect people and to share and to democratize that space. And I love that because we've been on that journey as a microcosm, as an organization, where in 2019 we did that first UK pilot for a full scale, like a 2-hectare seagrass restoration project, and we've seen a proliferation of projects off the back of that. But also over those years, we've written helped to write a seagrass restoration handbook, and one for Nature Scott and one for the Environment Agency, and that's about saying, this is what we know so far. They're very much live documents. There's still a lot to learn. But, if you wanted to do this, in your backyard, this is how you'd go about it. And it's about sharing that knowledge, because if you keep all that knowledge to yourself, that doesn't progress anything, and you're limited to the scale you can have. Whereas if you can share, and I'm a massive believer in sharing knowledge, just if you can tell people about what you've learned, and if we can share that information and everyone's got access to that information, then we can move forward. And there's, it's inspiring to see so many groups operating in this space now, and more coming forward as well.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I wonder then, because you are very positive in your outlook, what do you think seagrass ecosystems will look like in 2050, if you'd hazard a guess?
So globally, we want to see net positive return. So at the moment, we're in a situation like we're losing seagrass year on year globally at the moment. And that's a concern because, well, for everything we spoke about, carbon sequestration, nutrient cycling, fisheries, everything. I would love, in terms of staging points, I think 2030, I'd love to see a position where, because of the combination of improved water quality and active restoration and everything else, that we're in a position where we get actually no net loss, that, there might be loss in some places, but it's offset by gains elsewhere. And I think the trajectory for 2050 is we want to see net gain, and towards net 50, we want to be back in a place where seagrasses are existing everywhere pretty much they can exist across the planet. And so, we've probably lost a third of our seagrass meadows globally since, well, maybe over the last 40 or 50 years. Loads of coastal development, loads of poor water quality issues, and it depends, where. There's different challenges in different regions. And in some of those regions, it'll be easier to recover those ecosystems. And in others, it'll be very, very difficult. So there's a species of seagrass in the Mediterranean, which is like the queen of seagrasses, Posidonia oceanica, Neptune grass. It's the flagship species. It's the headline act for all the ecosystem services that society and policy talks around: fisheries productivity, carbon storage. It does everything. But it's like the oak tree of the seagrass world. It's very, very hard to restore, and it won't recover quickly. And so even 2050 feels like a bit of an optimistic timeframe to get Posidonia back to where it was. But I'd love to be on that trajectory. Whereas in other parts of the world where you've got seagrasses with a quicker turnaround and they're more fecund and that makes them more resilient, we might be able to see seagrasses bounce back. I guess it depends. It depends where, but certainly 2030, no net loss. 2050, net gain to a point where seagrasses are everywhere they should be.
That will be an excellent visual for sure. As I bring this conversation to a close, I wonder, because of you working in this space and being a diver and having all that previous experience of actually being in the water and getting very close to the importance of why nature is so valuable in of itself, but also for all those reasons you've talked about. Has it impacted the way you just live every day? Have you become more sustainable from those experiences?
I think, do you know what? I guess yes and no. I think as individuals, we are looking to make change. But this is a very academic way of phrasing this, but there's the choice architecture, the choices that we're presented with. Well, we might go into a shop. We might live in a location. I live in this flat in Edinburgh, and on my high street, if I was going to go and get some food, I get presented with a choice of, let's say, 10 shops where I could go, and I can go to the most sustainable shop. But then there's trade-offs there because, you know, I might not be able to afford to go to that shop every day as much as I'd like to. If I go into any shop, I get presented with a choice of what I can buy within that shop, and none of them are necessarily sustainable, but there's probably one which is less unsustainable, and you can maybe go for that choice. And our decision making on a day-to-day basis is framed by that choice architecture. We walk in and we have to make a million decisions every day, and that will lead to a certain carbon output or biodiversity loss or biodiversity gain or whatever it may be. And so I think sometimes when you break that down, it can be overwhelming to try and think about how as an individual you can make those differences. And that's where there's this whole discussion around system change. You know, we can't blame people, and you can't put the onus on individuals to make all these changes when the system isn't allowing us to make the changes. We're unless we starve, we can't choose the right food source, or, you know, and then there's the complication around it. You know, is it better to eat meat from a farm 200 meters away from my flat, or is it better to eat an avocado flown from the other side of the world, and the conflicting information? And oh wow, so it's a minefield. But I think, again, what it comes down to is being at peace with the fact that it's a minefield and just trying to make the best decisions you can, and own that, and be like, right, well, what can I do? And all I can do in my space is just keep pushing Project Seagrass, keep trying to engage people in this conversation, keep trying to think about the big picture and articulate the big picture, because, like I said, it's not about seagrass. Seagrass is one habitat in a mosaic of habitats that we need to think about. And, you know, it's also that vehicle to connect with the sea and the marine space more broadly. And whether it's as narrow as the sea, the ocean, which I think there is that lack of ocean, what scientists might also call ocean literacy. But there's, I guess, a lack of understanding of how important the sea is, because if we had that understanding, we wouldn't be treating it like a sewer. But also nature. You know, I think everyone slowing down during the pandemic and probably made people think a little bit more, appreciate the nature was on their doorstep. And I hope we don't lose that. I don't think we will, actually. I'm maybe this is just me being default optimistic, but I think there's a recognition that we are part of nature, and something that happens in nature can flip the switch overnight, and that we need to be changing our lifestyles and the way that we approach living on this planet, because otherwise those things will happen again and again and again, and, you know, we need to minimize that.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the kind of depth of that answer to that question, because it's not a simple question, and the fact that you brought in all those points about it being systemic, and we can't affect those systemic, you know, we can only do what we can do within the realms of the choices that were available to us. So I think it's a really good place to end on, in that we can all do what we can do, but we don't have to feel guilty about the stuff that we've got no control over.
Absolutely. And I think that hits it on the head, totally.
So thanks, Richard. It's been super illuminating talking to you about seagrass, and I, for one, have are going to look into the sea and see something new, and I hope others will too. So thanks very much for your time.
No, absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
What an illuminating conversation. Seagrass seems to be an unsung hero of the seas, providing habitat for much marine life, sequestering carbon, cleaning up water and enabling fish populations to prosper. Richard's project is raising the profile of seagrass, despite hurdles such as regulations. I very much admired Richard's big picture attitude and his ability to navigate tricky relationships with perhaps seemingly opposing organisations. He's able to find common ground for collaborations in the quest to restore biodiversity, mitigate climate change and reduce pollution. Like any environmental endeavour, there are numerous complex issues intricately entwined. To find out more about the project, check out the link in the show notes. I'd like to thank Andy Shaw for audio editing, Jeremy Jones for providing the music, and to you, of course, for listening. Don't forget you can subscribe to get automatic access to each new episode, and it would be lovely if you could rate, review and share the podcast. It really helps. Until next time, bye for now.